So this presentation is going to talk about the problems of non-compliance in one particular sector, the waste electrical and electronic equipment sector, and in particular the problem of a lack of level playing field. What we all crave as businesses is a level playing field, and if we can get that, we're happy, and competition is fair and competition works. But in the absence of that, we have real problems, and that's what I think we have at the moment, an absence of a level playing field. And so we're going to talk about the large and growing scale of non-compliance with the waste electrical equipment recycling requirements. We're going to talk also about some similar findings that were brought in by the OECD. The OECD published a report earlier this year. There's problems those creates. In particular, a brief look at the fulfillment house model. That is the methodology that a number of online marketplaces use to sell products to consumers. And finally, some suggested legislative actions and enforcement actions that might be taken. So let's look first of all at the large scale of free riders. Now this is a small study that Recolite did on our own, and we went on to a well-known online marketplace and searched on LED light bulb. We looked at the first 120 records, and we were able to look to the published register of compliant companies. We're fortunate that in this particular area it's very easy to identify if a company is compliant or not. And of those first 120, 91 were not compliant. 91 out of 120. And of those 91 free riders, 15 were based in the EU, 2 in the US, 74 in China and Hong Kong. And of those 91 free riders, 65 were available for next day delivery. So in other words, there was product being offered for sale on this major marketplace, hi Maria, that was not compliant and yet was already in the country available for next day delivery, sitting in warehouses. 26 were longer day delivery, but also all of those products were multiple packs, large numbers of LED light bulb per order, and also they had large numbers of English language reviews. So imagine the number of times you buy a product online, how many times do you actually bother to write a review? Not that often. So if you see a product with hundreds of English language reviews, think just how many purchases might have been made. Many, many thousands. So that's the study we did just on light bulbs, and then we expanded it, and the We Scheme Forum in the UK looked at a range of different products. And the key area in here is to look at the products along the top. So we've got tablet PCs, power tools, fitness watches, display screens, LED light bulbs, electric hair care, and washing machines and dryers. And look at the red line at the bottom, the proportion of product for each of those different categories, using broadly the same methodology that I just described, was also non-compliant. And it's frighteningly huge. It's frightening. So let's look at that. We've got LED light bulbs in the middle at 76%, 2 to the left, fitness watches, 88%. Power tools, 54%. Electric hair care, 50%. Tablet PCs, 40%. So the smaller products and those that are less costly seem to have a higher level of non-compliance. The more expensive products, like large household appliances, only 8%, and display equipment, televisions, 12%. So a relatively small number there. But that gives you a snapshot of the scale of non-compliance. It's big. It's really, really big. But it's not just us seeing this. The OECD did a study I mentioned and published the report earlier this year. They've estimated across all electrical products the non-compliance level is somewhere between 5 and 10%, but at a higher level for smaller products. And again, that reflects very accurately what the We Scheme Forum discovered in the United Kingdom. And the online sales are growing rapidly. As we all know, consumers are migrating their purchases away from bricks and mortar retailers into online. So if the proportion of online sales, non-compliance is so high, as you increase the level of online sales, inevitably the level of total non-compliance goes up. It's just a mathematical, natural consequence. The OECD did recommend a number of solutions, including making online marketplaces responsible, liable for the product that they sell through their portals. So there's a big scale of non-compliance, and I think that's quite clear. But what are the problems that this creates? In this first sector, the we sector, it undermines the financial sustainability of the recycling systems. Recycling of electrical products is paid for by the producers who put new product on the market. So they all between them share out and pay for the cost of recycling. If only a small proportion of them are paying that cost, then a disproportionate burden falls upon them. And so legitimate operators are put at a competitive disadvantage. And in some sectors, the cost of we is actually quite a big proportion of the total cost, maybe 10 or 20%. So if an online non-compliant operator is able to avoid between 10 and 20% of cost, that's a fantastic business opportunity, isn't it? It's great. You're immediately more competitive than the legitimate companies. And legitimate operators end up paying more because they're paying for all of the recycling of the product that then subsequently arises. And in truth, we've had companies say to us, why should I bother complying? I can see the level of non-compliance through these online marketplaces. Why should I put in the effort and the money to do the right thing? And actually, I can understand that. I have a lot of sympathy with that. When you see the level of non-compliance, it just doesn't seem fair. And of course, it's also damaging high street retailers. And the market is moving from online from the high street to online. That's clear. But if it was a level playing field, it would be less of a problem than a non-level playing field, which means the high street and legitimate operators are being increasingly penalised because they comply. And there is a risk of a vicious spiral. A smaller number of companies are actually paying the right cost. A larger proportion are paying no cost. The number of compliant companies gradually falls. Their costs go up, and it just goes down and down. And ultimately, you've got an unfunded or underfunded waste stream. And sadly, consumers don't understand the problem. They assume they're buying product. They assume it's safe. They assume it complies. That's explaining the exact problem to consumers is quite a challenge. So how does this fulfillment house model work? Here's a possible simple transaction route that might take place. So we've got an exporter based in Guangzhou. They send a bulk shipment to a fulfillment house who've got a warehouse in Lille. In Lille, they then pick, pack and ship according to a customer order and send it to a consumer in Ghent. There's a huge volume of product goes through this fulfillment house model. So the exporter has shipped product into Lille, but the consumer buys through the online portal and through the warehouse. And the question is, who in that scenario is the importer or the responsible person? Whose job is it to make sure product complies? That's the question. And we've had lawyers look at the fulfillment house contracts operated, and they are very cleverly written. Because you know who the importer is in that scenario? It's actually the exporter in Guangzhou. So the fulfillment house says to the exporter, your duty is to ship product compliant to arrive in my warehouse. My responsibility is to open my warehouse doors, to put it on the shelves, but you still own the product. It's still your product. You keep title to the goods, and you're responsible for doing everything to make sure it gets imported into my warehouse correctly. So the exporter is also the importer. That is a fundamental problem, because how easy is it to take legal action against the responsible person if the responsible person is in Guangzhou. And remember back to the numbers of non-compliant product. Over half of it was coming from outside of the EU, and so no matter what effective enforcement network is set up within the EU, it's really hard to take action elsewhere. And it's really important that products must comply with the regulations of the destination country. So equipment supplied into country A, into Belgium, needs to meet the regulations and obligations of Belgium. And it's true that extended police responsibility does require compliance with different different systems in different member states. That's the law. There are also some EU-wide compliance solutions available. Let's look at some solutions, though. As an immediate, it would be great to see more cooperation between compliance schemes and online marketplaces, and we'd love to see that happening and actually working together to find a solution. But obviously, a worked together solution is not the same as being required to comply with the law. In the long term, there have got to be amendments to directives, e-commerce directives, WE directives, others that make online marketplaces responsible for products sold. In the short term, it might be possible for the Commission to amend the Blue Guide. At the moment, there are some conflicting statements in there regarding online sales, and actually making it consistent and clear would help in this area. And finally, a few more short-term opportunities for member states. It would be quite possible for member states to try to set up voluntary arrangements to encourage compliance with individual marketplaces. That's being looked at in the UK at the moment. It can't be a long-term solution. In the long term, you can't encourage people to comply with the law just because they like to. Really, you encourage people to comply with the law because they have to. Amending national legislation to make online marketplaces responsible is quite possible now. There's nothing in the directive that prevents member states from doing that. There's nothing that would prevent member states from amending their legislation to make it possible to fine intermediaries who knowingly sell non-compliant product. And finally, they could even take legal action against the company based in Guangzhou. The company based in Guangzhou wouldn't turn up to the court, wouldn't defend their case, obviously. But once you've got a court judgment against it, is it then possible simply to seize goods from the online marketplace warehouse? Seize non-compliant goods. And when you start to disrupt non-compliance like that in a very practical way, it can have a big impact. So thank you very much. That's a kick-off for the afternoon, and I look forward to discussing it later on. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will start with very few words about our organization. It is Extended Producer Responsibility Alliance, which means organizations that involves members which are packaging recovery organizations. We have currently 26 members varying from countries like Malta and Cyprus to Spain and Italy. Our members are owned by the industry, and which for us is very important, they work on non-for-profit basis. They, among themselves, have over 20 years of experience and best practices in waste management. And the cooperation between them started much before EXPRO was established 5 years ago. Our members provide recycling and recovery of over 20 million tons per year. And they provide also over 200 million people with education and communication campaigns. Together with, of course, infrastructure for the collection, sorting and recycling of packaging. I would run very quickly through the legislative framework, because I believe later today a representative of DG Environment will focus also on these issues. As you all know, the Waste Framework Directive puts a focus on transparency in waste management operations. And among the Article 8A, it is mentioned also the requirements regarding registration information and reporting to be met by the responsible persons or an authorized representative from their territory. which of course includes the online sales. As you can see, this is also a part of the new legislation. It is very important to provide, as it was already mentioned, to provide a level playing field. So there should be not a disproportionate regulatory burden on producers, not depending on the quantities of the products they put on the market. Again, in the Waste Framework Directive in Recital 9A, there is again mentioned e-commerce enterprises who should again take all responsibilities that the other producers have. Currently, it was already mentioned that the volume of direct sales to household and businesses from overseas is growing at the estimations, because there are no actual current data available, but the estimations are that it is about 20–30% of the market across different waste streams in the Union. And already some data about the products, about the WEEE were presented, and you can imagine that all these goods come packed. So all these estimations concern the packaging that is accompanying the products that are brought both by the individual people in different countries. This is just, again, information from the retail trade from 2015 to 2017. You can see the increase in these processes. So it is really a very important and growing problem. And as it was mentioned, it is very important to provide a level playing field for the companies who diligently register themselves with the packaging organizations in the respective country and pay their fees for the end-of-life management of their packaging. I think we all agree that the distant sellers who do not take their responsibility represent a source of free riding, which means that they do not register with the packaging recovery organizations in the countries where their products are sold or used. They are respectively not financing the end-of-life management of their products, and there is no responsible contact person in the countries where they do not have warehouse operations. And all this leads to unfair costs, it is already mentioned. Of course, this leads to competitive disadvantages for the national producers or the producers who diligently implement their responsibilities, and which for us is also very important. This impacts the reporting, because if 20% or 30% are somewhere in the air, then the reporting for the recycling and collection and all relevant activities related to packaging waste management should be not correct. It was already quoted the OECD report, which is, we believe, for now the most important and useful document developed so far. So I will repeat a little bit what was said before, but it is very important to have strengthening of the enforcement and the coordination between the jurisdictions between different countries and different products. It is also very important to have relevant legislation, or at least some guidelines from the institutions. And it is very important for the obliged entities to be aware, to be made aware, so they have the relevant information, and to be easy for them to follow the regulations, so simplified transaction tracking, and to make use of the points of contact which already exist, and mechanism, of course, where it is possible. I would like to show you two case studies from the Netherlands and Belgium, which show how free riding, and especially in e-commerce, is how they try to solve the issue of this problem. Just overall information how it works in the Netherlands. So all companies that put on the market packed goods have to register with the Afvalfonds. This is the Dutch packaging organization, according to the national legislation. And the free riders, the ordinary free riders, which can be either e-commerce but also other companies that just import products and do not follow the legislation. The organization have different opportunities to check them, to see if they implement their responsibilities. This is via the trade register. This is according to the activity code, the number of employees, and of course they have also, for example, information about the surface of the company warehouses. So all information that can be used is collected and analyzed by Abfall funds. And also it relates on the weight of the packaging on the market. Again, this BIC on NACA code. And also they follow if the company is registered, if it was previously registered but stopped its registration. If it is not registered, obviously it can be non-compliant. But whether it should comply or not, this is again an issue that has to be followed by the organization. By the way, I missed to mention that Afval Funds, the Dutch Packaging Organization, decided together with the Parliament to have a threshold. So companies who put on the market less than 50,000 kilograms of packaging per year are not obliged, so they are not free riders. This is because upon their investigation they found that 95% of the packaging put on the market is, the responsible companies are about 1,000. So they estimated that it is more important to have the bigger companies who are responsible for almost 100% of the packaging in order to simplify things. Regarding the foreign web shops, they are using different methods to get the information which is missing. So they use, as you can see, online research. They watch commercials to see if the company or the online shop is providing products on the territory of the Netherlands. They speak with companies also which are registered with the Afval Fund. So if the company knows company which is internet seller, they can also report to them, and they can follow up this with the following actions. So first, they send information to the companies about the legislation, so the company should be informed. Then they are contacted, and there is a discussion or a meeting to see if they are obliged. In a case, there are some cases, unfortunately, when companies refuse to provide information, then the Afval Funds Verpackungen sends reminders. And after 5 trials to contact and to have this information received, the names of these companies are handed over to the inspectorate within the Ministry of Environment. So these are actions that our member from the Netherlands takes in order to provide that all companies who put packed goods on the market follow the legislation in the country. For Belgium, it is also very interesting case. The colleagues from FOSPlus, the packaging organization for household packaging in Belgium, together with other stakeholders and other partners, developed a very interesting guide. So first, the national legislation in Article 2 in the cooperation agreement, there is a definition of the party responsible for packaging. So these are companies who release products on the Belgian market who have not been packed in Belgium, very shortly put. For imports, the explanatory memorandum of the cooperation agreement states that when a foreign company conducts its sales activities on the Belgian territory, then it is responsible for the packaging. As I mentioned, the colleagues from FOSPlus, together with the Valipack, this is the Belgian organization responsible for commercial and industrial packaging, and with all other partners you see on this slide, developed a guidance on e-commerce packaging. So how to decide if a producer is responsible for, if a producer or online shop or platform is responsible for the end-of-life treatment of packaging. As you can see, on the right, these are the 2 normal ways. So the packaging, the product with its packaging is bought in Belgium, or the individual brings the product with the packaging from other country. These cases are clear. So in first case, it is the company is responsible because it operates on the territory of Belgium. The second case, when it's imported from other country, then the organization in the other country is responsible because it has been taken from there. But on the left, you can see the situation where the individual buys the product from online, from remote selling. There is I believe you can find it on the FOSPLUS website, and there is one of the authors of this great document here today. It is a very useful guide because it shows in very detail with many assumptions how you can guess or decide how this functions. So there are different options. For example, the final part of the website name, whether it's BE, whether it's COM, whether it's in the Netherlands or in France, but then the market is obviously Belgium. So there are all these estimations. It's almost detective work to find if a company, even if with the name showing that it operates in France, in the Netherlands, in Germany, actually aims at the Belgian market, respectively. The responsibilities for the packaging are not taken care of. So the measures how to address these issues that we believe will be very useful are, of course, first, online sellers and fulfillment houses should take their role as producer. Respectively, member states should develop provisions to address the specificities of the online sales operations. And online sellers should be also seen as part of the solution, meaning that they should share the information they have on their sales and distribution, because this information is available. The issue is how to get it. And again, some quotes and some measures from the OECD report. We believe that to strengthen enforcement, it's very important to have a single electronic register of producers for each jurisdiction. So in this way, the competent authority should be able to follow if there are some unregistered producers. Again, it should be very simple. So simple mechanisms should be allowed for producer organizations to report if they suspect there is a free riders on the market. So they should be able to report this to the institutions, so to assist enforcement. Again, coordination between the actions at supranational level is very important across the European Union, but also with other countries like the United States of America, to make the enforcement less daunting for individual territories, and again to share costs. And last but not least, there should be mechanisms to make it mandatory for all institutions or authorities which are responsible for trade activities in general to cooperate in a better way, like customs, tax and trading standards officials. So they should work in joint fashion in order to, together with the environmental authorities, to provide that the regulation is kept and it's enforced in the right way. So this is very shortly how the packaging sector sees the problems and possible solutions. I would like to thank you for your attention.
Commerce consumer law.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having the opportunity to have a presentation here. I restricted my presentation on unsafe products and product liability for unsafe products, but we also could say something about VE, about VAT, and so that's all where we are involved as an e-commerce association, and as all let me say. Compliant traders or traders that try to be compliant, we think it's a shame that we have a competitive disadvantage by all these rough traders not being compliant. So for us, the VAT problem from non-EU and even EU companies and not paying the VAT is for us the same problem as for the brick and mortar shops. So we are on the same line. What is that concerned? To give a brief introduction, we are representing about 75,000 e-commerce traders, large traders and small traders. 80% of our members is small and medium enterprises. 20% are the larger enterprises. We also represent platforms as well as traders acting on the platform. So we try to have a balanced position between the interests of, on the one hand, the platforms, and on the other hand, the traders acting on it. We are representing 20 national e-commerce associations, and we try to be the voice of things. of e-commerce Europe. And when we talk about product safety and liability for unsafe products, in general we have two kind of legislation. First, we have the product safety legislation. That's mainly on supervising, on preventing unsafe problems coming on the market, and having, if they are on the market, having them as soon as possible removed from the market. It's mostly by supervising authorities, and the general norm is that producers and distributors are not allowed to bring unsafe products on the market. And it's accompanied by an alert system, RAPEX. Maybe you know it. If you don't know it, take a look at it. It's very interesting. There's a weekly report on unsafe products, which are seen as unsafe products. On the other hand, you have product liability legislation that is giving a redress possibility for consumers to have their harms or losses compensated by the one having an unsafe product brought on the market. Imagine that you have a bulb which implodes, which is non-compliant on the safety rules, and which it explodes in your face. So you want to have compensation for the harm, for the losses you have as well in a personal sphere as in a private sphere, as in a material sphere. It's mainly directed on redress for consumers and other individuals in case of harm or losses caused by unsafe products. And it is, on the one hand, on contractual liability, because even if you didn't agree on it especially, most contracts are up to be containing also the obligation to only deliver safe products. And so if you don't deliver a safe product, it's generally seen as a breach of contract, as a breach of the sales contract. But also, if there isn't any contract, because there's no sales relation, for instance, there's also a tort liability. A producer which brings a product on the market that is unsafe can be liability in tort without a contractual liability for this unsafe product, for harm caused by this unsafe product. Because not only everybody who is harmed by an unsafe product has a contractual relation with the seller. And imagine this bulb exploding in your kitchen and exploding in the face of your kid. Who didn't sell the bulb itself, but you bought the bulb, and the kid is the victim. So the kid doesn't have a contractual having a relation with the producer or the seller. So then you only can rely on liability in tort. And it goes mostly on personal injury and death versus material losses. And we will see, I will explain, we have a system, a very, let me say, developed system in Europe to cope with this system. We also can talk about collective redress in case of mass harm. We now have a proposal for collective redress momentarily from the Commission. And it's thought about, but we think there should be somewhere a collective redress mechanism in case of mass harm caused by defective products or by unsafe products. When we talk about cross-border, when we talk about online sales of unsafe products, online is borderless. So it's basically global. And it's global, and we see that more and more trade is conducted over platforms, because platforms have a lot of traffic, and if you step in as a small business or even as a brick and mortar shop in a platform, you profit from the really huge traffic which is on the platform already, and that makes your sales opportunities improve. We have producers, we have distributors, we have importers, we have sellers, and on the other hand we have consumers. So it's a whole chain of actors acting in this online world, providing the products at the end from the producer to the consumer. And when we talk about cross-border online sales, we have to talk about private international law. And in Europe, private international law is regulated in Brussels I on jurisdiction and execution, and the Rome I Convention on applicable law. I will come back on that. So it's rather technical, but I'm a lawyer, so don't expect any more. When we look to the product safety legislation in Europe, we see generally we have a horizontal directive, which is the general directive on general product safety, and we have vertical directives, which are on certain segments of the market and regulating product safety for instance, safety toys, electrical equipment, on the making available or market electrical equipment, or personal protective equipment, and so on and so on and so on. We have more than this. I only took out some of the most important directives. They are directives, so that means that national member states can go further in having rules protecting the consumer more than is foreseen by the directive. That's what we call gold plating. Member states are allowed to have extra rules giving more protection to consumers. That makes it a bit difficult, like Trina said already. We like as web shops, we like a common market with only one set of rules and applicable in all member states in the same way. It makes it easier for everybody, makes it easier to understand for consumers, and makes it also easier to understand for traders, especially small and medium enterprises, which are mostly not having a lawyer in their employees. The basic rules for this product safety directive says a duty on manufacturers to ensure that products placed on the market are safe and do not pose a risk to the health or safety of consumers. For instance, we have the CE mark, and the CE mark on product is an indication that the product meets the essential safety requirements of the relevant vertical directives. But it is the producer itself who puts the CE mark on the product. The CE mark should only be applied to products covered by the vertical directives. So products covered by the general horizontal directive cannot be marked by a CE mark. And then we have the rapid alert system for non-food products. And maybe to give you an idea, because some people gave some figures. When we look to the last year, and then I have to take my spectacles, there were about, and it's about 28. There's 28 EU member states participating in this alert system, plus Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway. They are all cooperating in this system, and if a national supervisor finds out that a product is unsafe, it notifies it to the Commission, and the Commission notifies it to the other countries, and notifies it also to retailers and to producers. Take a look at it. I looked at it for this week. It's a weekly report, and you see, for instance, it starts with some children bikinis having some roads on the back which they can be strangled in, and so on, and cars having defects which make them unsafe. It's really nice to look at it. So if you want to have a discussion every week on products, look at it and do what you think is best. Because it also is addressed on producers and retailers to give them a chance to know which products are seen as unsafe, so that they can withdraw them either from the market or have a recall action. For instance, mostly with cars, there's a recall action, and the producer is asked to repair the defect. If we look to the figures, if we look to 2017, there were more than 2,000 alerts, and it's when we look to it, it's about 29%. It's on toys, 20% is on motor vehicles, and on clothing and textile, it's about 12%. When we look to the harm they may cause, its injury is about 28%. And I think a chemical risk is about 22%, and you have to think about products which have contain too much cadmium or something like that, and which is dangerous for your health if you are contacting or opposed to this products. The majority of risk products come from outside the EU, so it's more than 50% coming from outside the EU. And when we look to it, it's Chinese products in 2017 were 53%, about 1,155. And when we look to the European origin, it was about 26%, and it was about 430 notifications. So it's not only coming from outside the EU, there are also competitors inside the EU who place dangerous products on the market. And a final number is from this 2,200 alerts prompted, nearly 4,000 have been followed up by an action either by retailers or by the producers. And mostly the action is either directed to the retailer to withdraw the product from the market, or to the producer to provide for a recall and to provide for recall for repair for the defective. Okay. That's on product safety prevention. And when we talk to individual consumers being victim of a defective products, we have a line of directives which can be applicable. First, of course, the 85 directive on liability for defective products, which basically says that the producer or the importer within the EU, or the supplier, if they cannot be identified, is liable for harm and losses caused by personal injury or death. And there is a split liability for the seller and the producer for material losses in the private sphere. Up to 500 euros, the liability is for material damages in the private sphere, is for the retailer, is for the seller, and above this amount, the liability is for the producer, or whoever is seen as producer. For instance, you're also seen as a producer when you put your own brand on a certain product. And then we have another directive. It's a directive on consumer sales and guarantee. Which is at
Can
the
you
moment
conclude?
under revision.
Can you conclude soon?
Well?
Just to conclude soon.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, this is what we see. But now we come to the problem. Because safety on products sold online, we see that online shopping is getting more and more, and we also see that shopping over a platform is increasing very much. And that was the reason for the commission to issue a notice on market surveillance on products sold online, and to help national supervisors to come to let me say, a common approach and how to deal with it and how to see whether it's placed on the market or not, and give guidelines on. And the main thing is that in this guidelines is that products offered for sale online to consumers and other end users on the Union, marketed by manufacturer, importer, distributor, or producers established in the EU, are considered to be placed on the Union market. But the same accounts for products offered by producers, manufacturers, importers, and so on, established outside the EU, that direct their activities that target consumers within the European Union. Okay. There's a self-regulation going on online sales. On the 25th of June of this year, several online marketplaces, or four to be exact, eBay, Amazon, Rakuten France, and Alibaba, which are some of the main biggest platforms, they voluntarily signed a product safety pledge. And in this initiative sets out specific actions and obligations for the platforms in the field of unsafe products. There is a whole list. I guess you get these slides
Yes.
afterwards,
Yeah,
so I
will be
don't
shared.
save them up. But it makes them easy cooperate with supervisors and having them looked at the RAPEX system at regular times, so they can comply with or they can provide for action when unsafe products are placed on the market. And then I come to the problem for consumers. So I think the general supervising system is working quite well, because it's also looking on products from traders coming from outside the EU. But when we look to the consumer redress, the individual consumer redress, As long as it is in Europe, provided by European traders or European producers settled in Europe, we have a very decent system. First, you have to go to the court. You have to find out which court you have to go, and consumers are very well protected, because if they are targeted from another country, they always can go to their own courts, the court in their own country, and it's up to them whether they also go whether they go to the court of the trader in another country. And on the other hand, proceedings brought against the consumer by the trader. What? Okay, sorry. Okay, I do my best. But proceedings brought against a consumer by a trader, they always must be brought before the courts of the country of settlement of the consumer. That's very convenient for consumers, so they always have a court where they can go to. But now comes the problem. It's only directed to traders and producers which are settled, which have their domicile within the EU. So when there is a trader coming from outside the EU, Brussels I doesn't provide for any solutions. Then you have to look to the national private international law system of your country where you're seated as a consumer, where to know which laws will apply and which judges will be I think it will be in charge. So there's, in my vision, there's a problem, because most of the defective problems are coming up from outside the EU, and we think that the regulation needs to be adapted to cope with this problem. That also traders targeting consumers from outside the EU in the EU should be subject to the rules of Brussels I. That's it. Thank you very much.
Leon. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Now I'm really stressed because you call me the most relevant expert. I'm certainly not the most relevant expert, though. I know something about it, but I'm certainly not the person who knows the most. So my unit is responsible for market surveillance, CE-marking, product liability, and a few other things. And what we've done also recently is the goods package, for which I got 45 minutes, if I understood correctly, to make my presentation, which is a bit short, but I'll try to do it in 45 minutes. That was a joke. But I'll try to do it in 15 minutes. I've got a long story to tell, but I'll try to cover it in 15 minutes. So, last year we adopted the goods package. Adopted means that we made 2 legislative proposals plus a few other things which are very fascinating reading for experts, reports. But my story today is about the second proposal, is the legislative proposal on compliance with enforcement of union harmonization legislation, which covers about 70 EU legislative acts. It's not only about product safety, but it's also about environmental legislation and other consumer legislation. Because the evaluation that we did confirms what was being said, is being said, and will be said during this workshop. There are too many non-compliant products on the European market. So, why are there so many non-compliant products on the European market? There are several reasons for it. First of all, there are resource constraints for market surveillance authorities. They are understaffed. They suffered a lot from the financial crisis. So market surveillance at the moment in Europe is not optimal. It's not optimal. It's not their fault because they're being cut in human and financial resources, but it's a reality that at the moment market surveillance authorities are a bit understaffed. It's also a fact that at the moment there's hardly any deterrence for the enforcement tools. There are a bit of penalties, your product can be taken off the market, but in general we do have an enforcement problem because there's low deterrence, especially also for businesses established outside the EU. Because our main challenge, and the challenge for all of us, is that it's fairly easy to enforce European legislation in the EU, but outside the EU it's extremely complicated. And this is a challenge that we're all having. There's also a problem of fragmentation of our organization because market surveillance authorities are national, sometimes regional, and in one specific member states even local. They don't talk to each other, they don't cooperate, and they mainly only care about their local markets. But there's also a problem for businesses. Because you're all experts and you know that we are not exactly suffering from a lack of rules in the single market for products. There are many rules, and there are also a number of businesses, time to time, fail to understand that there are some directives or regulations might apply to them. And so we also have the challenge of e-commerce. E-commerce is an opportunity, and there we have to be fair. It's an opportunity for all European businesses. It is the future. So what is important for us is also we wouldn't distinguish between online and offline. It's one of the ways to sell products. So our focus of the proposal on enforcement and compliance was first of all to promote compliance and to help businesses comply. So we had foreseen in our proposal several instruments to help businesses, to provide information so that businesses could also have a source of information about possible issues of compliance. We will also have fit for purpose for new online supply chain, online sales supply chains and cooperation between authorities. And we were a bit inspired by the good practices in several member states. Now, first element is the promotion of compliance, where we had foreseen free information from national product contact points, compliance partnership arrangements, and memoranda of understanding, which were not exactly, to put it mildly, welcomed by the Council. Most of it was either deleted or shortened by the Council. We still have to discuss it, and will be my last slide. We still have to discuss it with European Parliament, but that part was fairly cut back by the Council because a number of people believe that it's not the role of market surveillance authorities to help businesses. Their role is to control products, and they also believe that businesses should be, if they're professionals, they should have their own sources of information about the applicable law. But this will still have to be discussed with the European Parliament too. Now there's a challenge of market surveillance of online sales, and especially the low-value consignments. Because low-value consignments, especially coming from third countries, are a bit of an issue. Here you see the growth in small consignments arriving from outside the EU, and you see the steady increase. Which means that we do have a challenge here for, especially for market surveillance, because market surveillance at the moment is mainly addressed to brick and mortar and the traditional supply chain. It's difficult to do market surveillance on smaller parcels or individual parcels, because we do not want, we are all consumers, we do not want that all our parcels are being opened by an authority. We also believe that online, and the advantage of online is a very fast delivery. But nonetheless, we do have a bit of a problem in terms of enforcement, because it is not always easy for market surveillance authorities to control this, especially low-value consignments, which consignments either below 22 euros or in the range between 22 euros and 150 euros. There was a loophole. We have to be fair, there was a loophole. And there was a bit of an unfair, an unequal treatment of businesses established outside the EU and businesses established in the EU. So what we wanted to do, first of all, is to cover the fulfillment centers, which some of them argue that they're not covered by EU legislation and that they're not more or less doing logistics. To include them in the proposal so that they would also be part of the market surveillance, but that they could also benefit from the compliance instruments that were mentioned in one of the previous slides. And also to strengthen the controls at the external borders. So what we had foreseen, first of all, is the person in the EU responsible for compliance information. I've heard that there was already in the previous session, which unfortunately I missed, was a bit of a discussion on it. This person for compliance information was actually inspired by our colleague for VAT. You may recall from one of the previous presentations is that there's a new VAT directive, 2017-2455, if I'm not mistaken, provides for an intermediary for VAT, a special arrangement for low-value consignments coming from third countries. So we were very inspired by that and said there should be a person in the EU responsible for compliance information. That person should be the main contact for market surveillance authorities, because we think that that person can give very valuable information also to market surveillance authorities. It's a bit of an authorized representative. That person would be the contact and could address any problems with market surveillance authorities. But we also believe that that person, which should be appointed by the manufacturer, I want to underline by the manufacturer, that person could also provide some feedback to manufacturers established outside the EU. Because this is what people very often underestimate. If there's a manufacturer established in outside the EU, that manufacturer sometimes doesn't get, or very often doesn't get, any feedback at all about actions taken by market surveillance authorities. And we do believe that it's in the benefit also of manufacturers outside the EU that if they decide that their product is to be sold in the EU, that there is a contact point so that they can get the feedback about any possible issues of non-compliance in the supply chain by market surveillance authorities or by any other, that person could also provide that feedback as a contact person. We're not saying that this person should be responsible for compliance, it's compliance information. So this was the logic behind it, and I will not hide you that this is quite controversial, because some people are opposed to it. I see some nodding. Some people are opposed to it. Some people are in favor of it. I see also some nodding. So this is still needs to be discussed also with Council and Parliament. It's not a miracle solution. I'll be very honest, no? Because it is very important also that as a supplier you declare things correctly. And so if you can take whichever measure, if things are not declared correctly for VAT purposes, for customs purposes, and so on, it can never be correctly enforced. Now, what we also had foreseen is extra powers for authorities also for online surveillance. There, the European Parliament has made an amendment to strengthen it a bit and to oblige market surveillance authorities to do specific online verification or verification of online sales. Also, powers to be extended to fulfillment houses, so that there is no discussion about market surveillance authorities that could take measures vis-à-vis fulfillment centers. And specific power to remove online offers for products with serious risks. And also we had provided for cooperation and coordination tools. For example, mutual assistance mechanism between member states. At the moment, market surveillance is quite national. It's very national or it's regional. Cooperation between market surveillance authorities at the moment is not optimal, to put it mildly. Especially when there's a cross-border transaction taking place. We will also try to improve the structural exchange of intelligence for customs controls, because there you see the two worlds at the moment in many member states. You've got the world of customs and you've got the world of market surveillance. In certain member states, customs and market surveillance are one single administrative authority, but when they're split, you see that there's still problems of cooperation between the two sides for customs, because the role of customs is in the first place to levy customs duties and sometimes also to verify for narcotics, drugs, arms and so on. And product safety is quite often not their main priority for customs authorities. So we would like there also to have a better system to inform customs authorities and to get feedback from customs authorities. And one of the important measures is also, rather than obliging market surveillance authorities to merge or so, we provide for the EU compliance network where we try to put them together and to ensure and to improve administrative cooperation between the several hundreds of market surveillance authorities in Europe. Now, the state of play of the negotiations and the next steps. So IMCO has voted its ambitious report in September. So as far as the European Parliament is concerned, the line is very clear. It maintains the person responsible for compliance information. It is now, according to the European Parliament, it should be the reference person. There's also strengthening of specific powers for market surveillance authorities online in the report, and several other items are in the European Parliament report. I must underline it's a very ambitious report, and overall we support it very much. Discussions in the Council are still ongoing. Because in the Council there the positions are diverged a lot on certain specific items, but specifically on the person responsible for compliance information. So there will be Council working parties still next week, and we nevertheless hope that we will be in a position to have this regulation adopted before the elections, and so that will enter into force, I hope, in 2021. 50 minutes. I managed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. And well, I will do my best also to not be too long, because I understand some here certainly know already the legislation. So I have a bit modified the title, because you were strongly focusing on the platforms, and I know you do, and that is. But I'm speaking about what is in place, and so that is not all on this. So I would just point to some directives, and I will go most in detail on the WE directive, so the directive on waste from electrical and electronic equipment of relevance to you. But we also have other legislation, environmental legislation, so it's ROS, it's about hazardous substances in electronics, it's about, it's about batteries. We have packaging, of course, all these goods have to be packed when shipped. And with the increase in online sales, we have, by the way, which is also an environmental issue, just a tremendous increase in the packaging. So that is something now aside from here. We also have cars. We have a directive on end-of-life vehicles, and there also in particular for spare parts and so on, is online sales are also becoming increasingly relevant. So we have actually two aspects under this legislation. On one hand, it's a so-called extended producer responsibility, and I've put this in bold because it's the main aspect here, which I think where there is an issue in relation to the compliance, so-called free riders is now of everything, let's say a number of actors in the online field. And we have, of course, also the aspect, but this was all what Hans in fact covered, of product compliance, because well, we have provisions on substances in these products, and mainly, and so of course it's also an issue that also under environmental law there has to be a compliance with these provisions. But for this I would want to refer actually to all what Hans has said, because they are also taken up in these 70 or so directives which are covered. So now coming more to the EPR, the Extended Producer Responsibility, and I will focus on the WE directive, but I should say that, and it will later come on to one, that the whole approach is of the same relevance to the packaging, for instance, and packaging waste directive. At present, there is no EPR obligatory for packaging and packaging waste, but member states have it in place, about all, but one, I think. And so the issues arise in the same way, but it will be obligatory also, as it is agreed now in the new waste package. So EPR means that the producer has a financial responsibility, basically, and organizational, for the collection, treatment, recovery, and disposal of waste from electronics. And, well, that's really in a nutshell. Then other provisions which I think are relevant for online sales is the provision of separate collections. So member states have to ensure that distributors are responsible for so-called one-to-one return free of charge. So when you buy a product that you can give your old product back. And for bigger retail shops also return of very small free of charge. Member states are to collect, are to organize the collection, and they have targets for this. And all these links also into the online sales issue. And lastly, practically, there is a register to be established by member states to monitor compliance with the provisions. And actually producers or their authorized representatives have to register in the member states where they place products on the market, and they have to report. So they have to report on the quantities and so on in order to be able to lastly establish compliance with the requirements under the directive. So now, where does the online or distance sales aspects come in? The producer is defined as any natural or legal person who, and it says irrespective of the selling technique used, including distance communication, sells electrical and electronic equipment, among other things. I mean, there are other points in the definition of producer, but it is also made clear that a producer is also the one who sells it by means of distance communication directly to private households and users other than private households in a member state, and is established in another member state or in a third country, so also from outside the EU. Distributor is any natural or legal person who makes the electrical and electronic equipment, it's difficult to read, available on the market. And this does not, and the distributor can be at the same time a producer. So there is an obligation for producers supplying electrical and electronic equipment by means of distance communication to be registered, as I said before, in the member state where they sell to. And when they not, and they can also, or they can comply with this obligation by appointing an authorized representative in this member state. And conversely, the member states are to ensure that a producer that is established in one member state's territory appoints an authorized representative the moment it sells to another member state, in that member state actually. And there are also provisions on administrative cooperation and exchange of information between member states authorities responsible for the implementation in the directive. So this is just putting it all together again. So once again, the directive applies to products and producers irrespective of the selling technique, including distance and electronic selling. And the collection obligations, they also apply as far as practical, taking the same form, and they shall be in principle enforced in the same way as for other distribution channels. And this is all, of course, in order to avoid that there are, the complying or the channels which are not online have to bear the costs lastly, because I say the producers have to finance all this of those who don't participate. So in relation to this directive, there are actually three groups of issues faced. On one hand, the so-called free riding that consists in not undertaking the physical take-back obligations. So, because you are just not there, you will not establish this one-to-one take-back. And by not paying the share of the cost of remanagement required and by not reporting. And maybe I should put this in bold because I understand this is the biggest concern. And also, free riding, of course, will contribute to underestimating the number of products placed on the market, and lastly, it will falsify the whole calculation of collection rates, which is an obligation by the member states to reach. And then you have also, and this was mentioned, of course, from the side of the online sellers, that registering in each member state where the electronic appliances are sold and to report to the national register is of course burdensome. There are different formats, there are different requirements, and so there is a call. Yeah, is this better? Yes, it's better. Oh, sorry. And there is a call for harmonizing this registration and reporting formats, which actually we are doing. And then is an issue from this side, of course, for the cost of appointing also an authorized representatives and above all, to know about all this, to be informed, to be aware of all it. On all these aspects, there are some examples of good practice in the member states. I will not go in detail now into this. Mainly it's on the first aspect, how the take-back is organized. I understand, and I think this is probably of particular interest here, that this whole issue of the of the compliance, when you can't get what is defined as a producer responsible, is much of interest here. And there maybe I should point to what seems to be in the German law, which they call a fiction of producer. So any distributor who offers electrical and or electronic equipment from not correctly registered producers is then deemed to be a producer, and so it is assuming the functions and the responsibility of the producer. I mean, this would be probably interesting to look more closely into. So, as said, on one hand we have a problem, an issue of awareness. I mean, how to make online sellers and operators, in particular based outside the EU, aware of all this. And we have an issue of enforcement. And so what I would like to mostly focus on, and I will certainly come to it, but we are not for the moment in a process of changing our legislation. We have heard about the goods package, and I think there are a number of instruments and so on which we can certainly be inspired from. But so we are focusing very much on working together. We have over the last 2 years, we had engaged with the member states, so-called compliance promotion initiative. This is on everything which has to do with the implementation of the directive. But online sales was pointed out as an issue to be further deepened, which actually we still have to do. So we have proposed also to the member states different mechanisms of peer-to-peer, so the possibility to learn from good practice in other member states. And we will go on with this in among other things, focusing particularly on online sales and the issues related to it. Then there is an initiative which is a bit, well, let's say bottom up, a network of the sanction and enforcement bodies from the member states, which was initiated by the German Environment Agency. So they are getting together. It was starting with 13 member states, maybe there are more now. I'm not sure, only started in 2017. And so the idea is indeed to cooperate in prosecution of cross-border free riders and to exchange best practice on this. And they do this actually in exchanging information, so sending, when information evidence is available about so-called free riders, so sending the report to the responsible national authority in the other member states, creating a platform for discussing the experience, and they've also provided a standardized complaint form against cross-border free riders. And so all this can be accessed. The issue is now for the platform, for the network, of course, to have more members, ideally all the EU member states, and to well, in general terms, of course, be able to continue and be more known with their activities. And we have them always in our exchanges on the directive meetings with the member states, and we would very much like to support this. We will also explore how we can link it up to other networks. So as I said before, this was very much focusing on the WE directive. We have the same issues basically in practice arising under the packaging and packaging waste directive. Maybe sometimes they're even more complicated. Now there, the EPR is obligatory, so the extended producer responsibility also at EU level. Member states have to establish these systems where they don't yet exist. And then I would like to come to the last part actually of the relevant rules and provision, and this is exactly on this EPR, so the extended producer responsibility. Yes, because one thing which is of course said, so how will the poor online sellers get their way in all these systems which are so complicated, different in every member state, where in part already operator fully integrated in the member states can't do it. And this is why we have to, with a new waste legislation which has been broadly overhauled this in the last years, and we have adopted now the new legislation this summer, we have a whole set of requirements on how these EPR systems, the extended producer responsibility, is to be organized, and in particular focus on accountability, transparency. And I should just highlight to some provisions which are in particular relevant to online sales. So there is an obligation to establish reporting systems on how the data on products placed on the market are gathered, on the collection, treatment, and the material flows. And then I will jump a bit to ones which are also relevant, but not so much just only in this context. And I should say that in particular member states have to provide for an adequate monitoring and enforcement framework with respect to all the obligations under extended producer responsibility, the financial means and the reporting. And then in this context, member states may be more specific and lay down requirements for monitoring, such as information, registration and reporting requirements. And there is to be a regular stakeholder dialogue on all this, on the functioning of the systems. So with all this being a bit of an insight into the different instruments which are of relevance, I should say the next steps particularly relevant on one hand under the WEEE directive. We will finalize a format for registration and reporting to registers which should be at the European level, well, applied by all member state registers. So they are facilitate this and harmonize to the extent possible. I should say that we also, I mentioned before, under the compliance promotion, we have something very, very down to earth. We will have continued to look into the good practice of the member states and exchange, because we hear a lot of this, and in particular also in events like today. But we would like to focus more specifically on online sales. And well, I mentioned on this EPR package, which I said before, this is a law now. It has to be transposed, well, the whole directive by July 2020. And then member states have still some time, 54 months, to comply with it. But in the meantime, we are developing guidance, in particular, well, among other things, on issues such as cross-border cooperation and online sales. And we have just launched a study to work on this. So online sales is one particular focus, and hope we will be able to publish this guidance by the end of 2019. I have some further ideas, but I think we can probably, there will be a discussion, so I think we can go into this then.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting, and